Albert adjusted his tie in the mirror, feeling it tighter than usual. It was Sally's birthday, and he should have been excited, but something felt off. The past few months had been strained. His wife Sharon seemed distant. Her phone was always turned face down, and her laughter no longer reached her eyes. Albert couldn't shake the suspicion that Sharon's illness was just another excuse. He entered the bedroom and found Sharon buried beneath the blankets. She glanced up at him, her face pale, her voice weak, but there was something unusual about her appearance. Albert noticed her phone buzzing quietly on the nightstand, with a message from Blake flashing briefly before disappearing. "Are you sure you can't come?" "Sally really wants you there," Albert asked, trying to sound concerned but unable to hide the tension in his voice. "We can cancel if you're not feeling well." Sharon looked up, managing a faint, odd smile. She coughed softly, patting her chest. "I'm really sorry, but I can barely move. You know I wouldn't miss it unless I was really sick." Albert nodded slowly, studying her. For a moment guilt flashed in her eyes before she quickly looked away. He recognized that look all too well. "Get some rest, I'll handle everything," he said, leaning in to kiss her forehead. She flinched slightly, making him pull back, puzzled. As Albert left the room, he paused in the hallway and pulled out his phone. He opened an app connected to a hidden camera he had installed in their bedroom days earlier. He hadn't wanted to spy on Sharon, but his gut had told him something was wrong. Today, he was finally going to get the answers he needed. Once she heard the front door close and the car pull away, Sharon leapt out of bed, her illness vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. She hurried to her phone to check Blake's message. "I'm on my way. Can't wait to see you." She grinned, quickly responding, "Doors unlocked. Don't keep me waiting." Sharon paced the room, fixing her hair in the mirror. She glanced at the bed she shared with Albert, the very bed she was about to betray him in again. For a split second, guilt crept in, but the excitement of the affair quickly drowned it out. She had grown tired of her life with Albert. Blake was her escape, her secret. At the hotel, Albert was helping Sally adjust her princess tiara while Sharon's best friend, Amber, set up decorations, her laughter filling the room. Albert forced a smile as Sally ran off to greet her friends, but his mind was elsewhere. He discreetly pulled out his phone and checked the live feed from the bedroom. Sharon, no longer feigning illness, was getting dressed, her mood completely different from the frail act she had shown him earlier. Amber noticed Albert's distant expression and approached him. "Hey, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, lightly touching his arm. Albert quickly shoved his phone into his pocket and forced another smile. "Yeah, just thinking about how Sharon's missing this, and it's bothering me more than I expected." Amber nodded, her eyes softening. "She's been acting strange lately. I tried to talk to her, but she just brushes it off. Maybe it's just a rough patch." Albert nodded, but didn't want to drag Amber into his suspicions. Maybe, he replied, but the sinking feeling in his gut was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Sharon paced the living room, checking her phone every few seconds. Albert had left for Sally's party, and she was finally alone. She could barely contain her excitement as she awaited Blake's arrival. Her heart raced as she glanced at the clock, the risk making it all the more thrilling. She could no longer wait. The faint rumble of Blake's car reached her ears. Sharon rushed to the door, peeking out before unlocking it. Blake slipped inside, flashing a wide grin as he pulled her into a quick kiss. "Miss me?" he asked, his voice low and teasing. He smelled of cologne with a hint of smoke, his jacket still cold from the outside. Sharon smiled, closing the door behind them. "More than you know," she replied, leading him toward the bedroom. A rush of adrenaline surged through her as she blocked everything else out. They stumbled into the room, the bed still neatly made, a mockery of what was about to happen. Blake tossed his jacket on the chair, unbuttoning his shirt with ease practiced. Sharon watched, momentarily forgetting that this was her husband's space. Albert's clothes hung in the closet, family photos sat on the dresser, but none of it mattered to her. Blake pulled her close, and they fell onto the bed, lost in their world, while the hidden camera in the corner captured every moment. In the middle of the tangled sheets, Blake leaned back, smirking. "Your husband's clueless." "Can't believe he fell for that sick routine," he said, running his hand through his messy hair. Sharon laughed, resting her head on his chest. "That idiot is too wrapped up in work to notice. When he does, I just act like the perfect wife." "It's almost too easy," she said, her voice full of contempt. "Besides, this is way more fun." Blake chuckled, reaching for his phone. He snapped a picture of the two of them together, holding Sharon close. "We should send him a postcard greetings from your bedroom," he teased. Sharon playfully shoved him. "You're such a jerk," she said, but she couldn't stop smiling. Being with Blake gave her the escape she craved from her monotonous life. They spent the next few minutes mocking Albert and trading inside jokes about their affair. Sharon felt alive, free from her responsibilities, blinded by the excitement of their secret. Meanwhile, the camera continued recording, sending the live footage straight to Albert's phone. At the party, Albert stood in a corner, occasionally glancing at the screen, his expression growing colder with each passing second. He watched as Blake sprawled across his bed, laughing at him, completely unaware of the camera's presence. Albert's hand tightened around his phone, fury simmering beneath his calm surface, but he stayed composed, focusing on the party guests. Amber approached him again, noticing the tension on his face. "You seem miles away. What's going on?" she asked, offering him a drink. Albert hesitated, glancing at the footage again. He hadn't told anyone, not even Amber, about his suspicions. Just dealing with something. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said, forcing another smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Amber studied him with concern. "If you need to talk, I'm here. I know something's up with Sharon, but I didn't want to pry." Albert appreciated her support, but wasn't ready to drag her into the mess. "I'll handle it," he replied simply, his thoughts already on what was happening back at the house. Back in the bedroom, Blake rolled over and grabbed a cigarette. He lit it, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. "I don't get why you're still with him. You could do so much better." Sharon sighed, stretching beside him. "I know, but he's stable. And then there's Sally. I'm just not ready to break everything apart yet." Blake shrugged with indifference. "Yeah, but you're here with me, so what does that tell you?" He flicked ash onto the floor, clearly unconcerned about the mess he was creating. Sharon watched the smoke curl in the air, guilt momentarily clouding her thoughts before she quickly dismissed it. "I'm tired of pretending. Every time he looks at me, it's like I don't even exist." "But she trailed off, running her fingers down Blake's arm. "You make me feel alive." Blake grinned, pulling her back into his arms. "You just like the thrill," admitted he teased, kissing her neck. Sharon laughed, feeling a rush she hadn't experienced in years. "Maybe I do," she whispered, giving in to the moment. Their conversation drifted from shared fantasies to petty complaints about their lives. The affair wasn't just about desire anymore, it had become an escape, a rebellion, a craving for something different. As they lay entangled in each other's arms, Sharon's phone buzzed loudly on the nightstand. She reached for it, her smile fading as she saw Albert's name. She hesitated, then ignored the call, turning her attention back to Blake. "Everything okay?" Blake asked, noticing her brief change in mood. "Yeah, it's just Albert, probably checking in on me," she replied dismissively. Blake smirked, pulling her closer. "You're here with me, that's all that matters." They continued to enjoy their time together, wrapped in a web of lies that grew tighter with each passing second. Neither of them realized how close they were to being caught, nor did they care. Their focus remained on the moment, oblivious to the consequences. "But I should head out before your husband decides to check in on you," Blake joked. Sharon laughed. "He's too busy being the perfect dad. Trust me, we've got all the time in the world." They shared lingering kisses, savoring the risk they were taking. Little did Sharon know, every second was being captured, every lie recorded. Time was running out for her, and she had no idea. The hotel ballroom buzzed with laughter and excitement. Kids ran around, shouting and chasing balloons, while adults mingled, sipping drinks and catching up. The room was filled with pink and gold decorations, streamers, balloons, and a large cake topped with the crown perfect for Sally's princess-themed birthday party. Albert stood in the corner, surrounded by family, but his mind was elsewhere. Amber was busy organizing games for the kids, her cheerful voice cutting through the noise. Albert forced a smile as she waved at him, but he couldn't relax. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a silent reminder of what he had seen earlier. He glanced around to ensure no one was watching and slipped away into a quiet hallway. Albert pulled out his phone and opened the app linked to the hidden camera. The The screen flickered and his breath caught as the live feed appeared. Sharon and Blake were tangled together on his bed, laughing and kissing, completely unaware. Albert's hands tightened around the phone, his knuckles white with fury. He watched as Blake leaned back, smoking casually, their smug laughter filling the room. Sharon looked so carefree, so different from the woman he thought he knew. Albert's chest tightened. He had suspected something was wrong for months, but seeing it unfold in real time was a gut punch. He couldn't look away, rage boiling inside him with each passing second. Back in the ballroom, music played on. Sally was cutting her cake, surrounded by her friends, and everyone cheered as she blew out the candles. Albert watched from the hallway, but he couldn't focus. His eyes remained glued to the screen, where Sharon's betrayal played out like a nightmare. He took a deep breath, his heart racing. He snapped a picture of the party crowd and quickly typed out a message, his fingers moving swiftly with anger and adrenaline. Albert hit send, and a message shot through to Sharon: "We're all watching your performance. You deserve each other. Enjoy it while you can, because you're homeless now. You've got 3 minutes to pack and get out. By the way, I'm marrying your best friend." He stared at the screen, imagining Sharon's reaction when she read the words. He hoped it would hit her as hard as her betrayal had hit him. Sharon was still lying in bed when her phone buzzed. She lazily reached for it, but when she saw Albert's name, a chill ran down her spine. She opened the text, and her heart sank. Her eyes widened as she read the message, and then she saw the picture of Albert smiling with Sally and their friends. The truth hit her like a freight train. Sharon bolted upright, shoving Blake off her. Oh my God, he knows," she screamed, her voice cracking. "He's been watching us this whole time." Blake sat up, confused. "What are you talking about? Calm down." Sharon shoved her phone into his face. Blake's smirk vanished as he read the message. "Shit," he muttered, scrambling to get dressed. "We need to get out of here, now." Sharon jumped out of bed, frantically grabbing her clothes, her mind racing. "He's coming here. Oh God, he's coming." She looked around the room, suddenly realizing how exposed they were. "He's bringing everyone. We're screwed." Blake grabbed his jacket, stumbling as he tried to pull on his shoes. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he mumbled, eyes darting around like a cornered animal. "Just pack your stuff and leave. He's not going to do anything." "You don't know Albert like I do," Sharon cut him off, panic clear in her voice. "If he says this, he means it. I have to get out of here before he shows up." She grabbed a duffel bag and started stuffing it with clothes, her hands shaking. She could barely think straight as the weight of her mistake hit her. Back at the hotel, Albert's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, seeing Sharon's frantic attempts to call him, but he ignored each ring, his anger unwavering. Amber approached, noticing the tension on Albert's face. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "You've been gone for a while." Albert forced a strained smile, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "Just dealing with something," he said, his voice tight. "I'll be fine." Amber looked at him with concern but chose not to press further. "Sally's looking for you. She wants to open her gift soon." Albert nodded. "I'll be right there," he replied, though his thoughts remained fixed on Sharon. He watched Amber walk away, her kindness reinforcing the justification of what he was about to do. It felt wrong, but after everything Sharon had done, he believed he had no other choice. Back at the house, Sharon was still frantically packing. She glanced at the clock, realizing her time was almost up. Shoving clothes into her bag, her breaths came in short, panic gasps. Blake, already dressed, paced nervously by the door, looking ready to flee at any second. "What are you going to do?" Blake asked, his voice barely concealing his fear. "You can't stay here." Sharon shook her head, grabbing her keys. "I don't know. I just need to leave. He's going to ruin me." "Blake," she said, on the verge of tears as the weight of her actions fully sank in. "This is all my fault." Albert's car screeched to a halt in front of the house. He flung the door open, his face twisted in anger. Behind him, Amber and their family and friends stood frozen, unable to grasp what was unfolding. Sally clung to Amber, confused by the abrupt return from her birthday party. Albert marched up the driveway, his footsteps deliberate and heavy, each one marking the countdown to the inevitable confrontation. He reached the front door and paused for a brief moment, listening to the frantic sounds of Sharon and Blake inside. His fists clenched, his knuckles white with fury. This was it. Albert shoved the door open, the sound echoing throughout the house. Sharon turned, her eyes wide with terror. Blake, half-dressed and desperately searching for his shoes, froze like a deer caught in headlights. For a moment the room was silent, the shattered illusions hanging in the air. Albert's voice sliced through the tension. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" he bellowed, his words dripping with contempt. "In our bed, Sharon, in our home," his voice reverberated through the walls, while everyone behind him stood in stunned silence, absorbing the force of his anger. Sharon backed away, her hands trembling. "Albert, please," she stammered, tears streaming down her face. "I can explain," but Albert wasn't interested in explanations. "Explain it to the streets," he shouted, pointing toward the door. "Because that's where you're going." "I'm done." "We're done." Blake saw his chance and bolted for the door, stumbling over his half-buttoned shirt and nearly tripping on the rug as he dashed past Albert. The family watched, stunned, as Blake ran barefoot down the street, his desperate escape a humiliating spectacle. No one moved to stop him. Amber covered Sally's eyes, shielding her from the chaos, though Sally peeked through her fingers, not fully understanding but sensing the pain in her father's voice. Sharon collapsed to her knees, her sobs growing louder as the weight of her betrayal crushed her. "Albert, please," she begged, clutching at the hem of his shirt. "I was stupid. I made a mistake." Albert stepped back, refusing to let her touch him, his expression cold and unyielding. "A mistake," he said, his voice sharp. "This wasn't a one-time slip-up, Sharon. You've been lying to me, to our daughter, to everyone. You did this, not me." Sharon crawled closer, her voice broken and desperate. "I'll do anything, please. Don't do this. Think of Sally." But Albert wasn't swayed. He glanced at his daughter, her innocent eyes filled with confusion and fear, and it only solidified his resolve. "You don't get to use her as an excuse," he said, his voice quieter now but still filled with anger. "You weren't thinking of Sally when you were with him, were you?" The room was silent, except for Sharon's quiet sobs, the weight of her betrayal palpable and suffocating. Amber stepped forward, trying to diffuse the tension, but Albert raised a hand to stop her. "Amber, take Sally back to the car," he said, his tone softening slightly as he looked at his daughter. "She doesn't need to see this." Amber nodded and gently guided Sally out of the house. Sally looked back at her parents, her eyes filled with unspoken questions, but Amber quickly reassured her that everything would be fine as they left. Albert turned back to Sharon, who was still on the floor, her face red and swollen from crying. "You made your choice," he said, his voice now calm but resolute. "Now you live with it." Sharon clung to his leg, desperately trying to find some forgiveness. "We can fix this," she pleaded. "I love you, Albert. I love our family. Don't throw it all away." Albert shook his head, pulling away from her grasp. "You threw it away," he said firmly. "You and your lover. You made a fool out of me, out of us, and I'm done pretending this can be fixed. You're not the woman I married. You're just someone I used to know." Sharon's shoulders slumped, her last bit of hope dissolving. She looked around the room, seeing the pity and disappointment in the eyes of her family and friends. This was her reckoning, and she was utterly alone. Albert glanced around the house, his eyes lingering on the pictures and memories they had built together. But now all he saw were the lies that had tainted every moment. "Pack your stuff and go," he said quietly but firmly. "You're not welcome here anymore." Sharon nodded numbly and got to her feet. She stumbled toward the bedroom, the same room where her betrayal had been caught on camera, and began packing her things. Every item she touched felt like a painful reminder of what she had destroyed. As she stuffed her clothes into a bag, the reality of her actions sank in. She had shattered her family, and there was no undoing it. Albert stood silently, arms crossed, watching her pack, his expression unreadable. There was no victory in this for him, only the cold, bitter end of a marriage that had once meant everything. Without looking back, he turned and walked out of the house. Outside, the party guests were still reeling from what they had witnessed. Amber stood by Albert, offering silent support. He glanced at her, and for the first time that day he allowed himself a small, weary smile. "Thank you," he said quietly. Amber nodded. "You don't have to thank me. I'm always here for you." Albert kicked Sharon out of the house. In the days that followed the confrontation, Sharon's life became a blur of shame and regret. She moved from one cheap motel to another, her once stable life reduced to a suitcase and a string of poor decisions. She had tried reaching out to her parents, hoping for some support, but the conversation had been painfully brief. Sharon's mother, her voice heavy with disappointment, had said, "You've embarrassed us, Sharon. I don't even know who you are anymore." Her father hadn't even spoken, he simply hung up, leaving Sharon with nothing but a dial tone and a crushing sense of abandonment. Sharon stared at her phone, scrolling through her contacts. Friends who once supported her had stopped answering her calls. Even those unaware of the full extent of her situation were avoiding her, uncomfortable with the rumors that had spread like wildfire. The only person she could think to call was Blake, the man she had sacrificed everything for. Sharon hesitated, then dialed his number, her heart racing as it rang. After several rings, Blake's voice finally came through, distant and irritated. "What do you want?" Blake asked coldly, his tone flat and without warmth. Sharon's voice cracked. "Blake, I need you. I have nothing left. No one's talking to me, and Albert won't let me see Sally. I'm completely alone." Desperation laced every word she spoke. Blake sighed heavily, clearly frustrated. "Sharon, I told you I can't deal with this right now. It's too much. I've got my own problems to handle." Clenching her phone, Sharon felt anger and sorrow rise within her. "You promised me, Blake. You said you'd be there for me. I gave up everything for you, and now you're just leaving me?" Blake's voice turned cold, his patience running out. "I didn't sign up for this mess. You think I wanted everyone to find out? My job, my reputation, everything's at risk because of this." Sharon's breath caught in her throat as she whispered, "I've lost everything. My home, my daughter, my family. You're all I have left, Blake." The silence on the other end felt like a final, crushing blow. When Blake finally spoke, his voice was emotionless. "I can't help you. You're on your own." The line went dead, and Sharon stared at her phone, realizing her last lifeline had been severed. But the next few days were spent trying to pick up the pieces of her shattered life, but every door she knocked on was slammed shut. She went to her parents' house, hoping they might take her in. Her father answered the door, his eyes hard. "You made your bed, now lie in it," he said harshly before closing the door without another word. Sharon stood on the porch, holding back tears. She reached out to a few old friends, but the responses were all the same, polite but distant. They offered excuses about being busy, subtly hinting that they didn't want to be involved in her drama. Sharon felt the walls closing in, the weight of her mistakes pressing down harder than ever. One afternoon, she decided to drive by the house she once called home, hoping to catch a glimpse of Sally. She parked a block away and watched from a distance as Albert and Amber played with Sally in the front yard. They looked happy like a family. Sally's laughter echoed faintly, a sound that used to fill Sharon's days, but now only reminded her of what she had lost. Sitting in her car, Sharon felt the sting of exclusion. She longed to run to Sally, to hold her and apologize, but she knew it was pointless. Albert had made it clear that Sharon was no longer welcome, maybe not now, maybe not ever. She tried calling Albert again, but each call went straight to voicemail. She left message after message, each more desperate than the last. "Please, Albert," she pleaded into the phone, "just let me see her. I made a mistake, but I'm still her mother. Don't do this." But Albert never called back. He didn't respond to texts. He was done, and Sharon knew it. Her daughter was now living in a home that no longer included her. Amber had taken over the role Sharon had abandoned, and Sharon could see the bond growing between them, a bond that used to be hers. One evening, Sharon sought solace in a familiar place, the local cafe where she used to meet friends. She sat at a corner table, sipping coffee and hoping for a familiar face, someone who might show her a shred of kindness. But when she spotted an old friend, they glanced at her, whispered to their companion, and turned away, pretending not to notice her. Sharon's grip tightened around her cup, humiliation burning in her chest. She had become the outcast, the woman whose name was whispered with disgust, her story told as a warning. That night, back in her motel room, Sharon finally let the tears flow. She cried for her daughter, for the life she had thrown away, and for the man she had trusted who abandoned her when she needed him most. She cried until there were no more tears left, only the cold, empty realization that she had no one to blame but herself. Picking up her phone one last time, she scrolled through old pictures of Sally. The happy moments felt like they belonged to a different life. Sharon's fingers hovered over the screen, but there was no one left to call. Blake was gone, her friends were gone, and Albert had built a new life without her. Sharon knew she had hit rock bottom. The consequences of her choices had fully caught up with her, and there was no going back. She was left with nothing but her guilt, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had cost her everything. As she lay on the stiff motel bed, staring at the ceiling, Sharon realized that this was her new reality, a lonely, painful existence, shaped by the choices she could never undo. Albert sat on the porch, watching Sally play in the yard. The afternoon sun cast a soft glow over the house, and for the first time in a long while, Albert felt at peace. Amber joined him, handing him a glass of iced tea, and sat beside him, their shoulders lightly touching. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. "I never wanted to come between you two," Amber said quietly, her eyes on Sally, who was chasing butterflies. "I never wanted things to end up like this." Albert glanced at her, his expression gentle. "You didn't, Amber? None of this is your fault. Sharon made her decisions, you've been here for me and for Sally, and that's what matters." Amber nodded, though the guilt still lingered in her eyes. She had been Sharon's best friend for years, and stepping into this new role felt both right and wrong. She hadn't intended to fall for Albert, but in the aftermath of Sharon's betrayal, they had found comfort in each other. Slowly, that comfort had deepened into something more. Albert set his glass down and took Amber's hand. "This is the life I was meant to have," he said with calm certainty, looking at her. "You, me, and Sally. I've never been happier." But Amber clasped his hand tightly, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and relief. They had endured so much, and it finally felt as if the storm had passed. In contrast, Sharon's life continued to fall apart. She was like a shadow in her own world, wandering through places she once belonged but could no longer enter. From afar, she observed as Albert and Amber built their new life together. It was a bitter irony that the person Sharon had once trusted most was now the woman raising her daughter. Sharon had once tried to approach Sally, hoping for just a brief moment of connection. She stood near the school playground, her heart racing as she watched Sally play. When the bell rang, Sally darted toward Albert and Amber, her face lighting up as she embraced them. Sharon hesitated, taking a step forward, but stopped when she saw the joy on Sally's face, a happiness she knew she could no longer be part of. She turned away, tears stinging her eyes, knowing this wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself. She was now reduced to sneaking glimpses and existing in the shadows, having lost everything she once took for granted. Now, she was nothing more than an outsider, unwelcome in the life she used to be part of. Meanwhile, Albert and Amber grew closer, spending their evenings together cooking simple meals that filled the house with warmth. Albert would crack jokes, and Amber would laugh a sound that had been missing for far too long. Sally joined in, giggling at the playful exchanges between the two adults she now considered family. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Sally looked up with a curious smile and asked, "Are you and Amber going to get married?" Dad Amber's face flushed, and she glanced at Albert, unsure of how to respond. Albert simply smiled, tussling Sally's hair. "Would you like that?" he asked, giving Amber a soft look. Sally eagerly nodded. "Yeah, then Amber can be my real mom." Amber's eyes filled with tears, and she leaned over to hug Sally. "I'm already your real mom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'd love to be your official one." Albert reached across the table, gently squeezing Amber's hand. "Then let's make it official," he said softly. They exchanged smiles, silently agreeing they were ready to take the next step. Their wedding was small and intimate, attended only by close family and friends. As Albert and Amber exchanged vows, the past seemed to fade away, leaving only hope for the future. Albert gazed at Amber, his heart full, knowing this was where he was meant to be. "I promise to always be there for you and Sally, no matter what," Amber said during her vows, her voice trembling with sincerity. "To love you both, protect you, and be the family you deserve." Albert smiled, pulling her close for a kiss. "And I promise to love you, Amber. You've shown me what it means to have a true partner, and I'm grateful every day that you're in our lives." From the back of the small venue, Sharon watched from the shadows. She hadn't been invited but couldn't resist seeing the moment that officially closed the chapter on her old life. She stood alone, her heart heavy, as she watched Albert smile at Amber the way he used to smile at her. As the ceremony ended, Sharon slipped away unnoticed, her presence neither missed nor acknowledged. She walked to her car, wiping away tears, knowing Albert and Amber had built a life she could never re-enter. Albert, Amber, and Sally continued to thrive, their days filled with love and laughter. For the first time, Albert felt a deep sense of contentment. Sitting in their living room, watching Amber and Sally play a board game, Albert realized he had found his home. Meanwhile, Sharon was left to gather the broken pieces of her life, standing on the sidelines, knowing the life she had once shared with Albert was now gone. For Albert, the future was bright, but for Sharon, it was another day of watching the life she had ruined move forward without her. Alone in a dingy motel room, Sharon sat, her once vibrant existence now reduced to the stale smell of cigarettes and cheap liquor. She stared at the peeling wallpaper, her thoughts drifting to the days when her home was filled with Sally's laughter and Albert's reassuring presence. Now all she had left were fragmented memories and a faded photo of Sally she kept tucked in her wallet, a painful reminder of what she had lost. Sharon had been drifting from place to place, each one more dismal than the last. She had tried to find work, but her reputation followed her. Doors that once opened easily now remained firmly closed. The whispers trailed her, the story of her downfall spreading throughout the town. Employers deemed her unreliable, and old friends had stopped answering her calls. Late at night, Sharon often found herself scrolling through Albert's social media, torturing herself with glimpses of a life she could no longer be part of. She saw pictures of Albert, Amber, and Sally smiling together like a true family, because that's exactly what they had become. Albert had moved on, and Sally now had a new maternal figure, someone who cared for her in ways Sharon no longer could. Sharon's days were spent in regret, and her nights were filled with sleepless torment. She tried to numb the pain with alcohol, but it only deepened her self-loathing. On her darkest nights, she would dial Albert's number just to hear his voicemail, never leaving a message, too afraid to reach out. Meanwhile, Albert and Amber's relationship flourished. Their home became a warm, loving space filled with joy and the little moments Sharon had once taken for granted. Amber's gentle and nurturing nature helped Sally adjust to their new life, and soon, without hesitation, Sally began calling Amber Mum. One afternoon, Amber and Albert sat together at the kitchen table, looking through Sally's school project, a scrapbook of her favorite memories, filled with photos of playdates and family dinners. A recent picture showed the three of them smiling during a trip to the zoo. Albert turned the page, pausing at an old photo of Sharon cradling baby Sally. "Do you think she misses this?" Amber asked gently, sensing the discomfort in Albert's expression. He sighed, gazing at the image. "I'm sure she does, but Sharon made her decisions. She chose herself first, and now she's facing the consequences." Amber nodded, understanding the weight behind his words. "Sally's happy now, Albert. You've done an amazing job." Albert squeezed her hand, thankful for her steady support. "I couldn't have done it without you, Amber. You've given us both a second chance." One evening, Sharon sat at the edge of her motel bed, clutching a photo of Sally. Tears flowed as she traced her daughter's smiling face with her finger. She had tried to rebuild her life, to regain some sense of normalcy, but every attempt ended the same failure. She was trapped in a loop of regret, unable to escape the consequences of her choices. Sharon's voice cracked as she whispered to herself, "I made one mistake, and I lost everything." The weight of her actions pressed down on her, and she realized she had no one to blame but herself. She had pursued a fleeting pleasure and, in doing so, sacrificed the people who mattered most. Tossing the photo onto the bed, she could no longer bear to look at it. Sally's image was too painful, a constant reminder of the life Sharon had carelessly thrown away. She lay back, staring blankly at the ceiling, feeling the heavy loneliness settle over her. Albert's voice softly echoed in his mind as he thought about Sharon's downfall. She thought she could have everything, he murmured to himself, watching Sally and Amber play in the yard from the kitchen window. But now all she has are memories of what she destroyed. Sharon's life had turned into a tragic story of greed and betrayal. She had once believed she could enjoy the best of both worlds, but in the end her decisions left her with nothing but emptiness. As Albert looked at his new family, he knew that he and Amber had created something beautiful from the ruins Sharon had left behind. For Albert and Amber, the future was bright and full of hope. For Sharon, all that remained were regrets and the bitter realization that she had lost the only things that had ever truly mattered.